Bipedalism, a form of terrestrial locomotion that involves walking on two legs. For humans, it's our primary form of locomotion. We start walking at a very young age, and barring some sort of accident or problem, continue to do so for the rest of our lives. It's such a ubiquitous and obvious thing that it's easy to take for granted. Our close relatives, however, are not bipedal, and neither, according to fossil evidence, were the earliest primates. This raises the question of when, where, and why this monumentally important morphological shift took place that allowed for a change from occasional facultative bipedalism to habitual bipedalism. Moving back in the human family tree, our immediate ancestors and relatives were not only bipedal like us, but they visibly possessed roughly the same level of adaptation for bipedalism that we do. Prior to the genus Homo were the Australopithecines, which were also habitually bipedal. Not that there haven't been improvements since then. Many of the traits, such as inline toes, the spinal configuration, and our pelvis shape, which make us efficient bipeds, have become more derived and pronounced since the time of Australopithecus. That said, Australopithecines like the famous Lucy were firmly bipedal, and so the story of where bipedalism came from precedes Lucy and her kin.
Bipedalism is an extremely important aspect of humanity. It's a tremendously efficient form of locomotion and saves energy that can be used by our brains or simply to reduce the resource cost of living. It also frees up our hands so that we can manipulate the world around us and allow us to leave the trees and travel great distances in open spaces. The emergence of bipedalism is an important chapter of our history, and understanding the relative position of that chapter tells us a lot about the relationship with our primates.
The thing about bipedalism is that its origin is fairly murky. We have extensive fossil evidence for hominids that are clearly bipedal. All the members of the genus Homo, and all the Australopithecines, were habitually bipedal, but their fossil evidence of earlier hominids has until recently been quite scant, and the only one with extensive specimens prior to Australopithecus and Ramidus is Ardipithecus Ramidus.
The clear emergence of bipedalism in Australopithecines leaves 4 fossil species to look at for zeroing in on the origin of bipedalism. These are Sahelanthropus chadensis, Aurorantuganensis, Ardipithecus cadaba, and Ardipithecus ramidus. These 4 fossils give us a shared temporal range of about 7.2 to 4.4 million years ago, with Sahelanthropus in Chad, Auroran in Kenya, and Ardipithecus in Ethiopia.
The particularly important part about whether each of these 4 paleospecies was bipedal is the answer to which of these first walked on 2 legs has the potential to lend credence to or take away from the various hypotheses surrounding what caused the shift in locomotion. Evidence seems to show that Sahelanthropus and Auroran both lived in forested environments, and this is a departure from the mosaic environment that is generally presumed to have played a role in the emergence of bipedalism.
There's no single, settled explanation for why bipedalism was selected for, but there are several hypotheses which are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Among them, the most well-known is that the trend of aridification in the Miocene caused the natural jungle and forest habitat of hominin ancestors to dry out and change. As that happened, the environment would have become a patchwork of trees, water sources, and savanna, also called a mosaic environment. According to this hypothesis, bipedalism was an adaptation for moving between groups of trees at first, and over time, the transition to a savanna environment became more and more final, and reliance on bipedalism increased. This is supported by evidence that Australopithecines were built for spending part of their time in trees, and are believed to have slept in and relied on trees for safety. However, The other advantages of bipedal locomotion cannot be dismissed for having contributed to selective pressure and adaptation in their own right. It has been argued that bipedalism was driven by the freeing up of hands for tool use, that the smaller surface area exposed to the sun helped with temperature regulation, that bipedal individuals were better adapted for scavenging, that the energy efficiency of bipedalism made it easier to survive, and that the ability to carry more food provided bipedal individuals with an advantage in acquiring mates and raising offspring. It has even been suggested that bipedalism was a response to a semi-aquatic lifestyle in which apes would wade through water or even dive for food. By finding out what we can about the environments of likely human ancestors or relatives, and whether or not they were bipedal, scientists can compare the fossil evidence against what each hypothesis would have us expect, and determine which explanations make the most sense. For that reason, we'll start by taking a look at Sahelanthropus and Auroran, the former known from a skull found in Chad, and the latter known from a jaw, femur, finger bones, and teeth found in Kenya.
The partial remains found for Sahelanthropus and Auroran leave a lot of room for debate and few indisputable conclusions. Sahelanthropus in particular has left no postcranial evidence, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to go off of. We can look at the position of the foramen magnum and determine a fair amount about the spinal configuration. Furthermore, features like reduced prognatism and other typically hominid traits are suggestive of closer morphological similarity. So, while a lay person might believe the fossils we have don't tell us anything, that isn't the case. It does, however, mean that of the pre-Anamensis specimens we have, Sahelanthropus and Auroran don't provide us with the definitive answers we want.
And sadly, that lack of definitive answer doesn't get resolved with Ardipithecus either. Ardipithecus cadaba is known from a fragmentary mandible, clavicle, toe bone, and forearm. While it does show fairly hominin cranial features, the postcranial features are more akin to non-hominin apes. Ardipithecus ramidus has yielded far more complete specimens, but their interpretation is still a matter of debate. As such, Ardipithecus does not resolve the underlying problems when trying to learn about the origin of bipedalism.
The unfortunate reality is that there isn't enough fossil evidence to provide a clear answer on when and why bipedalism emerged. The gap between fossils of Ardipithecus ramidus and Australopithecus anamensis is quite small, relatively speaking, about 200,000 to 300,000 years. Along with other factors, this provides a strong case for Ramidus being the ancestor of Anamensis. From that point on, we have a string of relatively complete and uninterrupted fossils through the Australopithecines, through the genus Homo, and to modern Homo sapiens. Even if the exact relationships aren't settled, the general trends are well documented. That just isn't the case prior to Ardipithecus ramidus. We have 4 potential proto-hominids, a smaller number of specimens, and fewer complete skeletons. The result is that we simply don't and can't have a clear picture until that's resolved. And we can only do our best to piece together our best theories and hypotheses. As you can imagine, that leaves a lot of room for debate.
While the origin of bipedalism may remain murky and a matter of debate, Ardipithecus ramidus provides one of the most complete examples of very earliest hominids, and does provide a great deal of evidence regarding the emergence of bipedalism. When a team led by Tim White found the relatively complete skeleton of a female Ardipithecus, nicknamed Ardi, that included much of the pelvis, skull, hands, feet, and teeth, they studied the find and later announced their findings, asserting that Ardipithecus ramidus was bipedal and lived in a primarily forested environment. The assertion was made based on the spine, position of the foramen magnum, and the shape of the hip bones, and the assertion that it lived in a forested environment was based on nearby finds. However, postcranial evidence suggests that Ardipithecus ramidus was not bipedal, and instead spent much of its time in the trees moving quadrupedally, while exhibiting extensive use of facultative bipedalism, to which it was more adapted than other apes, while on the ground. The notion that Ardi's environment was primarily wooded has also been challenged. To support the notion that Ardi was not bipedal, detractors of that theory point to the non-hominin limb structure, and the fact that unlike Australopithecines, Ardi's big toe was not in line and could still be used for grasping in the trees. The notion that Ardipithecus ramidus was bipedal still has support, however, and even being adapted to more use of facultative bipedalism is significant in the story of how fully habitual bipedalism came to be. Ultimately, study into the origin of bipedalism awaits more fossil evidence, and for a more clear and established consensus on the more recent finds.
While the fossil record may not be complete enough to yield any consensus on the issue of bipedalism, it does give us some insight. The location of Sahelanthropus in Chad forces us to reevaluate the role of climate and deforestation in the emergence of bipedalism, as does the forested environment of Auroran. Auroran also presents the possibility of other bipedal lineages that did not lead to humans, and Ardipithecus ramidus does raise a debate about what an early bipedal hominid would look like, and which adaptations for bipedalism might be present first. I think it will be exciting to see how the picture changes if and when more fossil evidence is found.